Hello everyone, this is Miss Smith, and the purpose of this video is to help you understand how to apply ABC format to your good news and your bad news letters. And so we briefly touched on ABC format in a previous week. ABC stands for abstract, body, and conclusion. And you'll remember that ABC format is a way in which we structure communication. When you think ABC format, I want you to think of the word structure. Okay, we'll talk about a lot of different types of formats in technical communication, but we're going to use ABC format for just about every communication we do this semester because it's going to help us structure our communication. Okay, and so again, it's abstract, body, conclusion. Some people also call it beginning, middle, and end. And what you see in front of you here is my version of a burger, okay? And so I want you to think of this burger when you think of ABC format and when you think of structure, right? You're essentially thinking of what goes first, right? That top bun, what goes in the middle or the meat, and then what goes at the very end, okay, or the conclusion. So again, ABC format means abstract, body, conclusion, and it deals in terms of beginning, middle, and end, how you structure your communication. So let's take a look at our burger example, and then we'll look at specifically how we can apply this to our good newsletter and our bad newsletter. And so you'll notice here where it says abstract, it says think complete, right? And I'll enlarge this a little bit so we can see a little bit better. I want you to think complete. In other words, in the abstract paragraph or in the abstract section, depending on what you're writing, you are giving the reader an overview, a complete idea of what your message is about. Okay, that's typically what's happening in the beginning of your communication. You want the reader to have a thorough understanding of what it is you're going to be communicating about. Remember, your audience will be impatient to find important information, and so they want you to get to the point. They want to know right off what it is you are writing about. Okay? And so when writing something that informs the readers of 5 W's type of information, remember the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and why, be sure to place the 5 W's information in this abstract section. Okay? Otherwise, you want to leave specific details for the body. So I'll say that again. Typically in the abstract, you're not putting a whole lot of details, okay? You're saving your details for the middle of your communication, for that body section. However, if you have to communicate something where you have to tell the reader who, what, where, when, or why, you typically want to put that in the abstract paragraph, and here's why. If you're having to communicate that basic information, who, what, where, when, and why, that's typically something your reader will want to know immediately. Okay? Depending on what you're writing, your reader will want to know that information immediately. So to best serve your reader, if you have 5 W's type of communication to relay to your audience, you want to put that at the very beginning to best serve your reader. Okay? And so again, with the abstract, whether it's a paragraph or whether it's a section, depending on whatever you're writing, you want to think in terms of an overview, right? Just kind of giving the reader a complete picture of what this communication is about. And if there's 5 W's type of information that you need to complete, you want to include that information in the abstract to best serve your reader. Okay? All right, let's move on to the body. And again, we're looking at a burger, right? So we want to think meat with the body. The section of ABC format that's known as the body tends to be the largest section. Okay, in the body paragraph or in the body section, this is where you want to include details and specifics and additional information about your communication. Okay, this is kind of where you get to the nitty-gritty, which is why this is the meat, right? The thickest part usually of our communication. Now, we're doing a good newsletter and a bad newsletter this week. And you'll probably know from this week's readings that in bad news communication, you want to place the bad news in an indirect manner. You don't want to begin with the bad news. You want it to be indirect. And so that means that you want to place the bad news in the middle. right? You want to be able to provide that overview in the very beginning and then put the bad news right in the middle. You never ever want to start with the bad news. You never want to do that to your audience. You always put it in the middle. And you never want to end with the bad news, right? Because that's going to be the last thing they remember. So sandwich it, right? If you have bad news to communicate, sandwich it between your beginning and your end, okay? And so that's what we're thinking in terms of the body section. Again, in the body, we're going to think in terms of this is the meatiest portion of our communication typically. This is where your details will go, your specifics, additional information, background information. And if it's bad news that you're communicating, you want to make sure to always place the bad news in this section, in the middle. Okay? Now let's take a look at the conclusion. In the conclusion paragraph or section, you're wrapping up your communication and you're thinking in terms of goodwill, right? Now, the tone of your letter or whatever you're communicating should always foster goodwill, right? Remember, we're trying to communicate in a professional manner. And we're always thinking of our reader first, right? And so even when we have bad news to communicate, we want to be as professional and as positive as we can be. But definitely in the conclusion paragraph, you want to make sure that you're ending in a goodwill manner with that positivity, right? Trying to put the reader in a good frame of mind as you exit your communication. And so you're wrapping up your communication, and that's why I want you to think treat. Okay, after you've had something that's pretty heavy in that middle, then now you just kind of want to find a way to end it on a positive note or on a high note or on a professional note. Okay, and so think treat in terms of this paragraph. And again, if you're communicating bad news, you never want to put the bad news in the conclusion. Okay, so that's our burger. So you can go back and take a look at this in a little bit more detail. But now let's take a look at our actual assignments and how we can apply ABC format to these two letters that we're writing now. Okay, and so these documents, by the way, are on D2L. You can go back and look at them apart from the video, and hopefully they will help you in writing the two letters that are due for this week. And so with the good news writing, right, we're going to begin with the 5W's information. Remember we said where there's 5W's information to be communicated, it's always a good idea to begin with that information in the abstract paragraph. And so who, right? Begin by introducing yourself. What, right? Tell the audience, or your audience in this scenario is Mr. Luciano, the event you are planning. Okay? When, provide a date and time for your event. Also include the total number of guests you're expecting. Why, right? And this should answer why you're writing Mr. Luciano. So for example, right? My name is Denisha Smith, and I'm planning my, what is it, the 25th year high school anniversary banquet dinner. And I'm holding this banquet dinner on the date and time that I'm holding it, right? And so don't use my wording exactly. Sit down and type it out and figure it out for yourself. But definitely you want to state the who, the what, and then the when will be really important. Be sure that you give a date and a time for your event. Make sure you do that. That's going to be necessary in this particular scenario for Mr. Luciano to see if he can accommodate your party. Also make sure that you include the total number of guests you're expecting. That's important information for him, right? So if he gets a letter from you saying that you want to bring 125, 150, however many people to his restaurant for an event, he's got to make sure that he has the space available. If you leave that information out, he won't have any idea of how many people are coming. So make sure you include the total number, right? No other numbers, just that total number of guests that you're expecting. Okay? And the why, of course, is you're writing him because you would like to reserve his banquet room. Now, in the body paragraph, this is where we're going to include the details that we need to know. You want to begin with a lead-in sentence that ends with a colon. Now, I will say there's more than one way to tackle the body paragraph. And if you just want to write it in the standard paragraph format, just line by line, you could certainly do that. So you could take what I'm telling you now about the body paragraph as a suggestion. So you could begin with what we call a lead-in sentence that ends with a colon. So an example of a lead-in sentence could be, I need to know the following information, and then put that colon at the end. And when you put in that lead-in sentence, what you're doing is you're setting up that first sentence just kind of enough to get you to where you're going to list some bullet points for the things that you need. And then you can clearly list the information you need, right? The scenario tells you the type of information that you want from Mr. Luciano, and you can list those in bullet point format. Do not exceed 5 bullet points. At a certain point, a certain number, it gets to just be too many. And so just keep it to 5 or less. Okay, so that's how you can tackle your body paragraph. Now with the conclusion paragraph, of course, you want to wrap up with goodwill, right? And so focus on that. You could begin this paragraph with a thank you sentence. It's always safe to say thank you. And so, for example, thank you for your time. That would be appropriate, right? So you could begin the paragraph that way. And if you want to compliment his restaurant, you can certainly do it here. And you can ask him to contact you by phone. Now, I know with our scenario, we we said that Mr. Luciano doesn't have internet, right? He doesn't have a web address or anything like that, and he communicates by letter with setting up these reservations. But it doesn't mean that he does not communicate by phone. And so you probably don't want to wait for him to have to mail you a letter back, but you have given it to him in the way he's requested. Now you're within your rights to say, I would like for you to contact me by phone so that you can kind of get the ball rolling on your own planning. And so you can ask him in that conclusion paragraph to contact you by phone, but be sure to leave a phone number where you can be reached. Okay? Never say you can contact me by phone without leaving your number. All right? And there's some other reminders and tips here. Remember, for this assignment, we're using full block format, and we've talked about that through our readings. With full block format, everything is aligned to the left margin. And I think that's around page 100 in your book. I think page 100 will give you an example of that, including how everything should be spaced. And now we're not going to include enclosures or copy notation with that because we don't have any enclosures and we're not copying anyone else. But all other parts of the letter must be included. And so you want to make sure that you include, and this is around page 103, I believe, in your book, 102 or 103, where you're going to begin with the heading, right? And then move to your date line and then your inside address. And so be sure to go back over that information, and it does begin on page 102. Keep in mind that the heading of your letter is going to be your return address. Okay, your return address. The date line will be the full date spelled out, the month spelled out. And that inside address, as the book calls it, that's simply the recipient's address. And I've given you Mr. Luciano's address in the assignment scenario. Be sure to include his name, and then underneath his name, put owner, right, because that's his title, and then the name of the company that he's with, which is Luciano's Italian Grill, and then put the address. Also, don't forget that I've given you some state abbreviations that you can use, so make sure that you look up the proper information and you're using the right two-letter abbreviation for each state. Okay? Be sure to use the correct font, style, and size. Remember, 11 or 12 point size. and a standard font. Do not type your letter in italics or bold. Double check your spelling and grammar, and make sure that you submit your letter. Now this is rough draft, but you're going to just submit your final draft to D2L by deadline, okay? And don't forget to bring, well actually you all don't need to do that. I'm using a version here for my face-to-face class, so I'll fix that before I upload it. You don't need to bring a hard copy because this is online. And so just keep all of that in mind, okay? That you're going to use this guide to help you to write your good news letter, and then you're just going to follow those other tips as they pertain to your class, okay? And so hopefully this part has been helpful for you. Now let's move on to the bad news letter, okay, and how we can apply ABC format to this assignment. And so for the bad news letter, again, you're thinking abstract body conclusion. Now with the abstract paragraph, we want to begin with that overview, right? Remember, complete, meet, treat, right? You want to kind of give that complete picture of what the letter will be about. And now with this scenario, you're having to turn down a student who has requested to see your financial records of your company for a class project. And so this is bad news because you're going to have to tell her no, right? And that is going to be bad news for her. And so a good way to tackle bad news writing is to begin with a thank you sentence, okay? So with the good news, remember we ended with that thank you sentence in the conclusion paragraph. But with bad news writing, it's usually a good idea to begin with thank you. Okay, so a thank you sentence to acknowledge your request. So for example, thank you for contacting Hoffman LaRoche, blah, 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 right? So that might be a good way to approach that. Now in another sentence, you can provide a quick overview of the goal of your letter. And of course, the goal of your letter, right, would be to respond to her request for, whatever she's asked for to see your financial records. And so just essentially tell her why you're writing. Include another sentence there that just briefly explains why you're writing. She would know why, but it's just so that it's stated. Now in the body paragraph, you want to begin with the bad news, right? You just kind of want to get right to it once we get to that body paragraph. And I suggest that you use a word like unfortunately to start this first sentence of the body paragraph. Okay? Now, sometimes students have used words like, I regret to inform you that, blah, 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 right? I regret to inform you that, and whatever comes after that. I would suggest not using that, and here's why. Keep in mind that with technical communication, we're trying to write as concisely as possible. We're trying to get to the point and use as few words as possible. And so if you use, I regret to inform you that, you could be way more concise if you simply said, unfortunately, right? Or use another word that's possibly, just a one word, you know, option versus using several words to say the same thing. And so you can use unfortunately if you choose to. And then offer a brief explanation for your decision. Okay? This should take maybe one or two sentences. Don't write anything that would make the recipient, right, would make your audience feel like the request was unreasonable or stupid or an inconvenience for you to consider. Remember, in bad news communication, we want to be mindful, especially in bad news communication, of our tone, right? We don't want to sound harsh. We don't ever want to sound like we're blaming or belittling our audience. We want to make sure that we maintain professionalism and that level of positivity throughout, okay? And so just state that you cannot accommodate her request and follow the information here under the body paragraph. Now with the conclusion paragraph, it's going to be the same type of thing. We're going to wrap up with a focus on goodwill. Okay, you can offer in this paragraph to let her speak with an accounting department controller because that was a part of the scenario, right? That could be like a consolation prize. It's not what she wants or needs, but you could make that offer. And if you make this offer to let her speak with an accounting department controller, you don't want to give her your name and contact information right? You want to just go ahead and skip that step and then have her contact that person directly. Now, in your letter, you can make up a name and a phone number for someone. Just make sure that you include it in the conclusion paragraph so that she doesn't have to make a stop at you again. She can just go directly to that person if that's something she's interested in. Okay? Um, and so your decision is final. So there's no need for you to ask her to contact you if she would like to discuss this further. Okay, and maybe not even for questions or concerns, because if you stated it clearly that you're not able to do what she's asking, then there's nothing else that really needs to be said, right? And so that's another thing with this type of communication. A lot of times when we have to communicate the bad news, we just kind of have to be firm with it and not leave that door open for further discussion or further negotiation. And of course, that depends on what we're communicating. In this case, we just want to shut that door. Okay? And so again, remember, this is bad news writing, so be careful of your tone. Do not assume that she is an accounting major, even though she's doing an accounting project, or that she's a good student. So in the past, students have tried to make the reader feel better by saying, we're always looking for good accountants at our company, and whenever you graduate, we hope that you will consider working for us. Well, that sounds like a job offer, right? And that's not what you intend to do. This could be the worst student ever. You don't know anything about her. So you don't want to overextend, right? You don't want to bind yourself in any way by implying that you would want to hire her. Okay? And so use full block format and correct spacing. Include all parts of the letter except enclosures and copy notation. Be sure to use the correct font, size, and style, right? Make sure 11 or 12 point size and just a standard font. Usually when you open your Word document, whatever font package it gives you, as you start typing, usually that's just fine. Like a Times New Roman or a Calibri, Arial, Helvetica, different fonts like that will be fine. Okay? Make sure you double check your spelling for double check your spelling and double check your grammar, okay? And make sure that you submit your assignment to D2L by deadline. Again, you're not submitting a rough draft. This is your final draft that you're submitting. And hopefully you found this to be helpful. But if you have additional questions, please let me know, okay? Take care, and I will talk with you again soon.